quarterly projections, no real consequences beyond whether an engine starts. She smiled like she was cutting glass. Though I imagine the intellectual stimulation plateaus quickly. Tell me, Daniel, what do you think about under those cars? Grocery list? Baseball scores? Daniel didn't flinch. His voice, low and even, carried the steady rhythm of someone who had no need to impress. Yesterday, he said, I thought about fluid dynamics, how brake fluid behaves under pressure, how a single failure can compromise the whole system. And I thought about my daughter's science project on Venus, how the pressure there would crush a person in seconds. For the first time, Victoria's smile faltered. She hadn't expected resistance, not from him. She didn't know that in less than 30 minutes, the same man she dismissed with a single word would be the only thing standing between her and death. Victoria leaned back in her chair, her expression cool and flawless, as if she were already bored with the conversation. The cafe's hum wrapped around them, but her words cut through it like the edge of a knife. I just closed a $300 million acquisition this morning, she said, her voice carrying the weight of someone accustomed to admiration. A deal that will reshape the pharmaceutical industry. That's the kind of complexity I deal with daily, the kind of impact you can only understand with years of education and vision. She lifted her latte with a hand that never trembled, her nails gleaming like polished weapons. I suppose fixing cars doesn't quite compare. Daniel's gaze remained steady, unshaken by the assault. He didn't match her arrogance with pride, nor did he shrink beneath it. His tone stayed neutral, calm, the kind of calm that came from weathering storms bigger than ego. You're right, he said. I don't understand billion-dollar acquisitions. I just understand machines. They're honest. When something's broken, you can see it, you fix it, you make it work again, no pretending. No one left destroyed for the sake of margins. The words landed between them with quiet force. For the first time, Victoria's sharp composure cracked, if only for a heartbeat. She masked it quickly with a laugh, light and dismissive, the kind that usually ended conversations. But Daniel didn't look away. He met her eyes as though he could see the hidden fractures behind the glass and steel. She leaned forward, her voice lower, laced with challenge. Efficient capital allocation improves lives. People like me push innovation forward. Without us, industries stagnate. Without us, there's no progress. Though I wouldn't expect someone under a hood with a wrench to see the bigger picture. Daniel tilted his head slightly as though weighing her words. His eyes, calm and observant, took in more than just her sentences. He noticed how her fingers tapped lightly against the porcelain cup in a rhythm too practiced to be casual. He caught the way her gaze tracked every movement in the cafe, as though measuring exits and timing escapes. Trauma, he thought. Recognized trauma, even dressed in designer armor. She was carrying wounds no deal could erase. He answered evenly, his Oklahoma drawl softened but present. Progress is important, I won't argue that, but sometimes the bigger picture leaves out the people in it. Lives aren't numbers, and when you forget that, you risk breaking more than you build. Victoria's eyes flashed, but before she could shape her next retort, Daniel's focus shifted. His body stilled in a way she couldn't name, though it sent a ripple of unease through her. 3 men had entered the cafe less than 5 minutes ago. On the surface, they looked ordinary, but their movements told a different story. Too coordinated for strangers, too careful for friends. One slid into a seat near the window, another angled himself by the door, and the third claimed a table with a view that overlapped both. Daniel's instincts, honed long before grease and engines filled his days, sharpened to a blade. He noted the way one man's hand brushed his ribs more often than necessary, the way another scanned the room but never touched his coffee. Fields of fire, he thought, not random at all. His breathing slowed, the rhythm familiar. Calculate distance, 8 feet to the nearest cover, 15 to the exit. Inventory weapons, ceramic plates, glass pitchers, the tactical pen still clipped to his pocket out of habit. Victoria, oblivious, kept her eyes on him, mistaking his silence for defeat. That's the difference between us, Daniel, she said, her tone dripping with triumph. You fix what's already broken. I make sure the world keeps moving forward. But Daniel wasn't listening to her anymore. His attention was locked on the quiet storm building at the edges of the cafe, the danger creeping closer with every passing second. The shift happened so quickly that most of the cafe never realized the moment their quiet morning was shattered. A young waitress, her tray stacked with cappuccinos and croissants, moved between the tables. Maybe she caught the edge of a bag, maybe her shoes slipped on polished marble. Whatever it was, the tray tipped, porcelain shattered, and steaming coffee spilled like blood across the floor. The sudden crash snapped every head toward her, but Daniel's eyes were already on the man by the window. His jacket flew open in the commotion, and the Glock on his hip gleamed under the lights, black and unmistakable. Daniel didn't think. His hand shot across the table, seizing Victoria's wrist. In one smooth motion, he yanked her down to the floor, his body covering hers as designer heels skittered away across the marble. The impact stole her breath, shock locking her body in place. A second ago, she'd been preparing her next cutting remark. Now her world narrowed to the weight of his chest pressing her down and the sound of 3 weapons drawn in unison. "Everyone on the ground, nobody moves!" The command cracked through the cafe, young but fraying at the edges with adrenaline. Chairs scraped, plates shattered, and terrified cries filled the air. The 3 men spread out exactly as Daniel had predicted, fields of fire overlapping, desperation written into every jerky movement. Victoria froze, her mind, so sharp in boardrooms, so quick with numbers and strategies, simply stopped. The muzzle of a gun swept across the room, impossibly large, impossibly real. All she could think of was being 7 years old again, hiding in her closet while her parents screamed downstairs, helpless, small, breakable. Daniel's voice cut through the panic, low and steady, a rhythm to cling to. Stay down, don't look at them, don't be memorable. His words were clipped, ordered, forged in places where hesitation killed. His body positioned itself between her and the chaos, a human shield she hadn't asked for and didn't deserve. Her breath came fast and shallow, panic clawing at her chest until his hand found hers on the cold marble. "In for 4, he whispered, barely louder than the scrape of a chair. "Hold for 4, out for 4, match me now." She focused on him because it was all she could do. His breathing was steady, controlled, his chest rising and falling like a metronome pressed against her shoulder. She tried to follow, in, hold, out, slowly. The dizziness eased, the frantic edge softened, and for the first time since the guns appeared, she felt like she might survive the next heartbeat. Above them, one of the gunmen yanked an elderly woman's purse so hard she fell to the floor with a cry. Laughter followed, sharp, manic, the kind that made Victoria's skin crawl. Daniel's eyes flicked toward the sound, cataloging every detail. Track marks on the man's forearm, pupils contracted, an addict, unpredictable, but slower to react, vulnerable. Victoria clutched the marble floor, nails biting against the cold stone, as Daniel's other hand brushed the water pitcher that had rolled off a nearby table. He tested its weight like it was second nature, as if every object around him could be turned into a weapon. There was no panic in his movements, no hesitation, only calculation, precise and terrifyingly calm. And then she understood. This was not the simple mechanic she thought she'd been mocking minutes ago. This was someone else entirely, someone who had walked through fire and carried its scars, someone who knew how to turn chaos into order. Her voice trembled as she tried to speak, but the words died in her throat. Daniel didn't look at her. His gaze was locked on the attic closing in, his body already coiled to strike. "Stay with me," he whispered, the calm before a storm, and for the first time in years, Victoria obeyed without question. The chaos sharpened into something far more dangerous when the leader seized a child, a girl no older than 5, her pigtails trembling as her small body shook with sobs, yanked from her mother's arms. The muzzle of a gun pressed against her temple as the mother screamed, begging, powerless. The cafe seemed to shrink, every sound amplified. The girl's wailing, the desperate gasps, the metallic click of a safety being flicked off. "Come out!" the leader barked, his voice cracking with adrenaline. "Come out! or she dies. 5 seconds. His words rattled the air like a countdown to oblivion. Victoria's nails dug into the marble beneath her. Her mind, brilliant enough to dismantle billion-dollar companies, went utterly blank. All she could see was that child's tear-streaked face. All she could hear was the pounding of her own heart. But Daniel moved with a terrifying calm, his jaw tightened, his eyes narrowing with focus. In that instant, the world shifted for him. This wasn't a cafe anymore. This was combat. This was math. A father calculating the impossible. Save one, save many, risk everything. Wait! Daniel's voice cut through the room, controlled, commanding. He stepped into view with his hands raised, the water pitcher abandoned behind him. Slowly, deliberately, he slid the pistol he had taken from the downed gunman across the counter, letting it clatter on the tile where everyone could see. He made himself vulnerable, the target, the bargaining chip. "Let her go," he said, voice steady as steel. "You want me? I'm right here." The leader's hand trembled slightly on the gun. Up close, Daniel saw the truth behind his rage. He was too young, barely into his 20s, exhaustion etched deep into his eyes. His name came sharp and desperate from one of the other men. "Tommy, just shoot him. We don't have time." Daniel seized on it. "Tommy," he said quietly, almost gently, as though the two of them were the only people in the room. "I know what it feels like. I've got a daughter too. Her name's Emma. She's 7, loves dinosaurs, pancakes, and soccer. And I'd do anything to protect her. I know that kind of fear. I live with it every day." Tommy blinked, his grip faltering just enough for the girl's sobs to pierce the wall of adrenaline around him. He looked at her, really looked at her for the first time. The child shaking in his arms could have been his own. Daniel took a step forward, hands still high. "This isn't you, Tommy. You're not the kind of man who hurts kids. You're a father who made a desperate choice, but you don't have to become something your daughter would be ashamed of." The cafe was silent, except for the muffled sobs of the mother on the floor. Victoria, crouched behind the counter, felt her breath catch. She had watched Daniel with suspicion, with disdain, with disbelief. But now, in his voice, she heard something she had never expected. Empathy wielded like a weapon, sharper and stronger than any show of power she had ever seen. Tommy's gun lowered a fraction, his eyes flicking between the girl and Daniel, his lips parted, cracked with uncertainty. "They've got my daughter," he whispered, words spilling out like a confession. "If I don't pay by tonight, they'll kill her." In that moment, Victoria saw it too. The ruthless thief she had feared was just another father, caught in chains no one else could see. And Daniel, standing unarmed before him, wasn't fighting with fists or guns. He was fighting with compassion, with the truth of a man who knew what it meant to bleed for the people he loved. The moment hung on a knife's edge, Tommy's hands shaking, his finger tightening against the trigger. Daniel kept his voice steady, eyes locked on the young man's, when a shift rippled through the room. The second gunman by the window moved, his nerves snapping under the weight of silence, desperation spilling into vigilance. He raised his weapon, the barrel swinging straight toward Daniel. Victoria's body reacted before her mind could catch up. Her gaze caught the bright red fire extinguisher mounted on the wall beside her. In one sharp motion, she yanked it free, its weight startling in her hands. She didn't think of balance sheets or mergers. She didn't think of power or pride. She thought of Daniel standing unarmed, of the little girl sobbing on the floor, and of the truth that if she didn't act now, someone would die. With a cry torn from somewhere deeper than fear, she swung the extinguisher in a wide arc. The sound of metal striking bone cracked through the cafe like a bell. The second gunman collapsed instantly, his gun firing once into the ceiling as he hit the ground. The shot jolted Tommy back into panic. He jerked his weapon toward Daniel, lips trembling with apology. "I'm sorry, I can't go to prison. My daughter," his words choked off as Daniel moved fast as muscle memory, precise as breath. In 2 motions, he knocked Tommy's gun hand aside, the bullet shattering a window instead of flesh. They crashed to the floor together, rolling through shards of glass and spilled coffee. Tommy fought with the desperation of a man cornered, wild and erratic. But Daniel fought with something more: training, control, purpose. His elbow struck Tommy's solar plexus, knocking the air from his lungs. His grip tightened on the younger man's wrist until the gun clattered free. Then, instead of finishing him with brutal force, Daniel shifted into a chokehold. Just tight enough, just long enough, until Tommy's frantic struggles weakened and he slipped into unconsciousness. Alive. Beaten, but alive. When Daniel rolled away, his breath came harsh and ragged. Blood stained his side where glass had cut deep, but his eyes were clear, scanning for danger until the first wail of sirens reached his ears. Police stormed the cafe seconds later, guns raised, shouting commands that rang through the chaos. Daniel instantly dropped to his knees, hands visible. The reflex of a soldier who knew that in moments like these, heroes and threats looked exactly the same. Victoria was still clutching the extinguisher, her arms trembling, her designer blouse torn and smeared with soot. She looked at him, this man she had mocked as small, ordinary beneath her, and saw him differently. Not just a fighter, but someone who chose restraint when vengeance would have been easier. A man whose scars carried both violence and mercy. As paramedics pushed through the crowd, Daniel tried to wave them off, but the blood soaking through his shirt betrayed him. His face had gone pale, adrenaline no longer masking the pain. "My daughter," he rasped, the words more urgent than the wound. "Emma, school gets out at 3. I need to." Victoria stepped forward without hesitation, surprising even herself. "I'll handle it," she said firmly, her voice steady for the first time since the guns appeared. "Tell me where, tell me who to call. Let me do this." Daniel's eyes searched hers, confusion mingling with exhaustion. This was the same woman who had looked down on him less than an hour ago, the same woman who had sliced him with words sharper than knives. But now, standing above him with the extinguisher still in her hands, she wasn't untouchable or cold. She was raw, fierce, and, for the first time, on his side. That night, Victoria stood in her penthouse 40 floors above the city. The lights of Chicago stretched beneath her like a constellation she no longer recognized. The skyline, once her trophy and fortress, looked cold, almost mocking. She walked past the long dining table where she had eaten alone for years, past the polished marble that reflected her silhouette back at her like a stranger. It struck her with the force of truth. Every ounce of power she had fought for, every deal she had crushed, every wall she had built meant nothing when compared to the way Daniel had stepped into danger without hesitation. She had watched him bleed for strangers, shield her with his own body, and show mercy to the man who had nearly killed them. In the quiet of her penthouse, she felt smaller than she ever had before. Her phone pulsed with messages, executives demanding updates, reporters circling with questions, even her mother's voice asking if she'd seen the news. She silenced them all. The noise of her world felt meaningless now, background static compared to the memory of Daniel's voice, steady in the chaos, telling her how to breathe. By the time she reached the hospital, it was nearly midnight. The corridor smelled faintly of antiseptic and coffee that had been burning too long on a hot plate. Paramedics had stitched and bandaged Daniel, though the deep gash along his ribs had taken more out of him than he admitted. He sat propped against a pillow, pale but stubborn, eyes sharp even through exhaustion. Beside his bed was a little girl with his eyes. Emma, small, with dark hair tied back loosely, her sneakers scuffed from playground battles. She clutched a notebook against her chest and leaned over the bed, asking questions with a seriousness far beyond her years. "Does it hurt when you breathe? Dad, is the medicine strong enough? Did you scare the bad men away?" Daniel's face softened in a way Victoria hadn't thought possible. The hard edges of a soldier melted into something entirely different. He brushed Emma's hair back with gentle fingers, his voice low, steady, almost playful. "I'm fine, Bug. Just a scratch. And yeah, the bad men are gone. You're safe." Victoria stood in the doorway, caught between stepping forward and slipping back into the shadows.